Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. All right, I want to start today with what's happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where once again we have another major flare-up and no clarity at this time whether this will be on the order of weeks or months in duration or possibly even longer. Now, normally I would just jump right into the story and what's going on and my perspective. But because of what I came into my office to this morning, dozens and dozens of emails and messages from people speculating as to why I haven't talked about this yet, making all sorts of accusations and allegations, some of them very just sort of sad in terms of what they imply people think is my life on sort of a day-to-day basis. And I've not spoken about this recent flare-up much yet, only 3 times on a recent bonus show and a couple times on recent live streams. I've not spoken much about it yet because I've not felt that I have much to add or say that's different from my analysis the last time we talked about it. But I received a couple of emails from longtime viewers respectfully saying, this feels like it could be different this time and it would be great for you to update your take on what's going on. And so I'm going to do it. I also received dozens of furious and often emails playing on anti-Semitic tropes, referring to me as a Zionist Jew pig, and things that are even worse that I won't say because of our radio affiliates so that they don't have to bleep things. And people saying everything from, you are not talking about it because you're scared you'll be exposed as the Zionist pig that you are, or it's financial reasons or whatever. So I'm under no illusion that those people will be satisfied with this segment unless I unilaterally put the sole blame for a 70-year conflict at the hands of genocidal evil Israel. And anyone who knows me knows I would never give such childish black and white takes on any issue. And so those people who have been emailing me saying I deserve to lose my show because I haven't yet talked about it, I'm sure will shift to saying I should lose my show because of what I say today. This segment is not for them, clearly. There were some really wacky things being emailed to me, maybe on other platforms as well. I've really only looked at emails, but maybe things are crazy on the Discord or on Reddit. I don't know. People saying, well, clearly I'm not saying anything because I'm afraid of the blowback from taking a position my audience won't like. That's never stopped me before on the show. What I have said before is if there's an issue that's unnecessarily inflammatory that most of my audience seems not to care about, I would consider skipping it. But I've done dozens of segments on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Then I got emails saying, David, you should really have the courage to do what this other Jewish person did and that other Jewish person. They were able to put aside their Jewish bias and take the correct view on this, which is Israel is the only problem, and Israel in some cases even should not exist, as some people emailed me. David, why does your Judaism blind you? You can't be a fair arbiter here because you're Jewish. This is the same argument that right-wingers made during the fight for gay rights, saying, of course, gay people want gay marriage. They're biased. You can't listen to them. They can't get past their personal connection to the issue. And it borders on anti-Semitic because it plays on the trope of a dual loyalty, that American Jews have a conflicting loyalty to Israel. Most Jews, of course, have never been to Israel. I've been there once 6 years ago. I don't live there. You won't be able to engage with me on things like, can't you put aside your Judaism and take the correct position? That's an identity politics rabbit hole. It's trash, and I don't engage in that. So I want to focus on what's been taking place. Now, one last thing, and again, I hate that I even have to do this, but you should see what I stepped into in my inbox when I got in this morning. I also got emails saying, David, you're motivated by money. So you want to avoid losing money if you give an unpopular take. And so that's why you're hiding your view on the subject. And some people writing and saying, David, you used to cover the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because you had a smaller audience and you made less money. Now there's too much money at stake. I'm going to ignore for a second, again, the anti-Semitic trope of Jews and money to say that over time, as the show has been more and more successful, financial considerations are less and less a part of anything I do at this point. I never chose stories based on money. I chose stories based on, do I feel like talking about it? Do I feel like I have something to add? Is this something my audience would be interested in? That's it. It's just my show and I pick the stories every day. Financial incentives never dictated story choice. They especially don't right now. And by the way, if lots of people are interested in the topic, then doing the story would bring money no matter what I say. Hate watching is still watching. It still makes just as much money. So it's not only an incorrect take, it's wrong on the facts as well. All of that now out of the way, all of the reasons why I've not been not doing a story now out of the way, let's talk about what's going on. And if you want to engage with me on this, engage with what I'm actually saying, not anything else that you're bringing in, okay? There are arguably two catalysts to this flare-up, and both have Israel to blame. Both have Israel to blame. Both have Israel to blame. Can I find ways to maybe say the catalysts are more two-sided? I could, but they feel disingenuous to me. The narrow catalyst for this flare-up is Israel. The first is that a squad of Israeli police officers entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. This is a very volatile place. I was there a few years ago. Non-Muslims are only allowed at Al-Aqsa during certain time periods. Then, I don't know what's going on now. I was lucky to be there at just the right time. We were allowed in. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is controlled by the Jordanian Authority within the old city of Jerusalem, one of the most interesting places I've ever been. The old city in general and Al-Aqsa itself, fascinating historical places. A squad of Israeli police officers entered the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, brushed the Palestinian Jordanian attendants aside, went across the courtyard and cut the cables to loudspeakers that were broadcasting prayers during Ramadan. Disastrous idea. Now, why did they do it? The explanation is the Israeli president, not prime minister, the Israeli president was delivering a speech at the Western Wall on Israeli Memorial Day. You had Ramadan prayers conflicting with a Memorial Day speech, so the speakers were cut. It's a terrible idea. Now, you can argue, and unfortunately, this is how intractable this conflict is, where many of us would say, oh, come on, just, give this speech somewhere else or turn down the music or whatever, turn down the prayers or whatever. That's not the way this conflict works. And if you've been following the 70 plus year history of it, you would see why this explodes. But I understand thinking, how is that what was the first catalyst? Then we had the upcoming eviction of 6 families from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. That led to protests. Then there was a police raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque on May 7th. Police officers with tear gas, stun grenades, rubber-tipped bullets went into the mosque compound around 8 p.m. local time. And this set off hours of clashes with protesters. There were hundreds of injuries, according to medics that were on site. As reported by the New York Times, the police say that the stone throwers started it. Worshippers are saying the Israeli police started it. And then things exploded as usual. Each side has their own view on who the real wrongdoers are and who is merely reacting to the other side. Another intractable a bedrock of every single one of these flare-ups. And there's plenty to go around. Dozens and dozens of Hamas rockets coming over from Gaza, even reaching Tel Aviv. Israel doing bombings, as is always the case. Israel's actions leading to more death. Now, let me say one thing about this whole disproportionate response thing that often is mentioned. Yes, Israel's response is disproportionate. That's absolutely true. Israel is far better armed than the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. That's absolutely true. And whenever this happens, there tend to be more deaths as a result of Israeli action. That's absolutely true. And that's horrible. I think that we should also be honest with ourselves that some of the people who say, well, if 6 Palestinians die and 1 Israeli dies, it's a disproportionate response. I don't think they would be pleased if the numbers were the same. I mean, would we really be seeing a different reaction from people if 12 Palestinians and 12 Israelis died? Would that no longer be a factor? I don't think so. So, of course, the response is disproportionate. Disproportionate responses are a common thing in many conflicts, ethnic, political, military, etc. It doesn't mean it's good, but to focus on that when obviously the side that's better armed is likely to do more damage, I don't think it helps us understand what's going on any better. Now, then Israel did another completely harebrained thing, blowing up a building in which the Associated Press was working in Gaza, saying there were Hamas there. Now, maybe there were Hamas, maybe they weren't. Israeli authorities did call and say, get out because we're going to hit this building. Whatever is the case, Hamas is in all sorts of different places, and it just seems idiotic to me to target this building because it does exactly what Israel's opponents want to say Israel does, which is suppress criticism and news of what's happening in Gaza. And in some literal sense, that's exactly what happens when you blow up a building out of which the AP is working. So disastrous idea, absolutely condemnable. So let's go through these things first, and I'll tell you where I stand, and pay close attention because, again, I'm not going to engage in responses that mischaracterize what I say. I am and have been against evictions and settlements, period, for the 25 years I've been following this conflict. There's no mitigator. I'm against it. I condemn it. This current Israeli government makes me sick and has for a long time, and settlements are a big part of that. One thing that is important and that tons of people are missing are that much like the Palestinian people are different from Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and the ultra-radical Palestinians, the Israeli people, Israel as a country, and the current administration are three different things. When during the Iraq war years, some Europeans wrongly saw all Americans as warmongers who wanted to go to Iraq, we all understood why that didn't make sense. We know the difference intuitively between the Trump administration, the United States as a country, and Americans as individuals. And yet more than half the emails I received about this don't seem to understand or make that distinction between the Netanyahu administration, Israel as a country, and the Israeli people, using the three terms interchangeably. And that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on. How can we even have a remotely sensible conversation about this conflict if you interchangeably assign blame or characterize three separate entities, the current administration, Israel as a country, and the Israeli people as one and the same? The evictions from East Jerusalem are at the heart of this, and I'm 100% against that. They are illegal by international law, period. Settlers are radical extremists. I share nothing with them. I am diametrically opposed. Settlers are a tiny fraction of Israeli Jews who are just a portion of world Jews. Unless someone says I'm for the settlements, I assume that they are not, because this is such a radical and relatively fringe group. Settlers are, in a sense, massive provocateurs, shameless ones at that. And sadly, right now, the Netanyahu government is benefiting from the settlers. And so they are allowing this to happen. Second, I am 100% against the Netanyahu government, which I believe is allowing this to happen for the benefit of Benjamin Netanyahu. The depraved and disgusting right-wing prime minister, Netanyahu, knows his days are numbered. He was unable to form a government. So he is allowing this to happen now because this is how he operates. Look at the chaos. You need me. He pulled this before an election some years ago. Now, this is when maybe some people want me to start saying, who is to blame and to what degree? David, please say this conflict is 99% Israel, or say it's all Hamas, or you are a Hamas sympathizer. Nothing is that simple. What I will tell you is what I see as the most likely path to peace for the long term. And it requires both Netanyahu and Likud not to be in power on the Israeli side, and somehow for Hamas to be removed from power in Gaza, but not replaced by Hezbollah, which is essentially as bad but better armed. So here's my perspective. If you said, what is the most likely path to peace? And this is why I didn't have much to say initially in this, because fundamentally the path to peace has not changed in my view. So starting with the big picture, anyone who thinks that there should be no Palestinian state in the future is just not a productive participant here. The Palestinians need a state of their own, a contiguous one, which I will get to. Anyone who thinks there should be no country of Israel is also not a productive participant. And if you really want to see a situation where many people would die, it would be a real attempt by serious players to make Israel no longer a country. So the Palestinian people deserve a state and to live in peace, and the Israeli people do as well. And right now, neither side is being led by those who benefit from peace or who want it. Until that changes, nothing will change. So the first question is, who's in charge in a hypothetical peaceful situation? In Israel, it's not Netanyahu and it's not Likud. Okay? On the Palestinian side, Hamas must be replaced by a more secular Palestinian Authority immediately. Hezbollah replacing Hamas won't get us to serious peace possibilities. Does Mahmoud Abbas have a role to play there, currently overseeing the West Bank? Maybe. I'm open to that. It doesn't seem Hamas is open to that. When you look at how long Abbas has been around, I think you can also increasingly make the case that Abbas is not a likely arbiter to a longer term peace. Abbas has also given, lie-riddled speeches at the UN. So has Benjamin Netanyahu. To the extent that Abbas might be a productive partner, I'm open to it being a Mahmoud Abbas-led coalition government, West Bank and Gaza. But I don't know how feasible that really is. In all likelihood, you are going to need to have the law of return for Jews to Israel maintained and a law of return established for the future Palestinian state. Now, the entire point of Israel is, since Jews were kicked out and discriminated of so many parts of the world for so long, that's a place Jews know they can go, even if Hungary turns extremely right-wing anti-Semitic or whatever the case may be. There also is going to have to be, I believe, some ability for Palestinians to return to Israel. Something's going to have to be conceded. Mathematically, and this is something Yasser Arafat talked about in the 90s, it's not going to be 5 million Palestinians. It's just not going to happen. So we need a combination of some reasonable Palestinian return to what will be the state of Israel. Certainly, the Palestinian state will be able to decide who is allowed to go there as well. Anyone who wants to move back to Gaza or the West Bank would be free to do so if the Palestinian Authority wants to allow it. Now, Ehud Barak in the past proposed a symbolic number of Palestinian return to Israel and significant financial reparations. That's something that could be looked at. But that's more details once we get past sort of the big questions. In terms of the land, what are the borders, right? I believe the most likely path to peace will come with something that is more or less the Clinton proposed borders, which is similar to a lot of the recent ideas, not the Trump ideas. Forget Trump. Anything Trump said is in the trash. The Palestinian territory would include the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Yes, East Jerusalem. There are some problems with exactly what the limits of East Jerusalem would be because they are disputed. But let's imagine if we got to this point, they could be agreed upon. East Jerusalem would become the capital of the Palestinian state. I think that has to be conceded. And the caveat would be the Jewish quarter of East Jerusalem should remain under Israeli sovereignty. We could do just a whole show on this, but if you look at the desecration of the Jewish quarter when it was not under Israeli control from, I believe, 49 to 67, you can read more about that. I think that is a caveat. On settlements, I mean, just all settlements have to stop immediately. Israel has to agree in principle to remove settlements that can be removed, and to offer meaningful land swaps for those that cannot. Now, as a practical reality, and I also go back to what Arafat said about this, not all the settlements at this point can be realistically removed. I hate that. That's disgusting. But if you say, David, you're the pragmatist negotiator, morally, I have no problem with removing every settlement. And I know the talking point is, well, these are people's homes. Yes, they're people's homes that were built in violation of international law, and they never should have been built. Yasser Arafat had the idea that keeping the larger settlements in exchange for meaningful land swaps would be okay. That's probably something that would have to be negotiated. And then certainly, on the other hand, all settlements have to stop. I believe the blockade has to be lifted to Gaza. You do have to have some way of preventing weapon materials from being brought in. It has to be negotiated, but the blockade, as a sign of good faith, at least initially, has to be lifted, of course. Palestinians have to immediately, all Palestinian groups have to stop all rockets immediately, stop the tunnel building, so on and so forth. Hamas and other groups have to demilitarize Gaza as part of a peace agreement. We saw in the 2-year period after the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, but before the blockade was put in place, thousands of rockets. So there has to be a demilitarization, but the Gaza blockade has to be removed. And as long as the demilitarization and no rockets are held to, the blockade has to be removed. How do you hold people to that? I don't know. That has to be figured out. And then lastly, the eventual peace agreement has to include that all claims are being renounced and it is the end of the conflict period. Because the problem you run into is you have some sort of an agreement in principle, but not all claims are renounced. And then when the agreement is violated, everybody goes back to pretending like this was never identified as the end of the conflict. If there's going to be a serious deal, once the right players come to the table, and as I already mentioned, who those are is complicated, it has to be determined that that is the end of the conflict. And in the future, that allows any violator of the agreement, either on the Israeli or the Palestinian side, to be held to account. Some non-binding thing is not going to get us what we need. If you want to react, address these specific points. All insults, anti-Semitic responses, blanket replies like what I had over the weekend in my email, Zionist pig, it's all going to be ignored. The winners here are Netanyahu and Hamas. Chaos from which Netanyahu can say, you need me to protect you, that's a gift. Hamas justified in its brutal grip on the Gazan people because look at what Israel is doing to us. We're the only ones who can respond with the rockets. The Palestinian people lose here. The Israeli people lose. Bibi wins and Hamas wins. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist. And what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video. Remember that the David Pakman Show is made possible mostly by members who sign up at joinpakman.com. Grab yourself a membership. This you just have to see. For more than a year now, the right has been saying open everything, stop masks, open schools, open restaurants to full capacity. Look at all these left-wing doomers saying close everything forever. Just open it up. Now, of course, over time, if we started to vaccinate people, we've started to open things. But Joe Biden was going too slowly for them, or so they said. He wasn't doing enough. Biden keeps wearing his mask. He's going too slowly. Vaccinated people don't need masks. So last week, the CDC comes out and says, hey, we have more information about how effective these vaccines are. And they are so effective that vaccinated people don't really need masks, outdoors, indoors, but still pay attention to state rules and pay attention to the rules of businesses that you're in. Great. Fox News and right-wingers are thrilled, right? Wrong. Check out all the new complaints that these bad faith actors came up with. First, Fox News runs a very suspicious story, pointing out that CDC chief moves from impending doom to no masks for the vaccinated in 45 days. On March 29th, Dr. Rochelle Walensky warned the nation of dire days ahead. And yet, suddenly, no more masks for vaccinated people in many situations, pending state guidelines. That's suspicious, even though she did what the Trumpists have been asking for a year, even before it was safe to do it. Totally bad faith, totally pathetic. Here's another one. After this announcement about masks from the CDC, Joe Biden also made a statement updating people on the new CDC guidance for masks. Fox News interviews Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia. And the story is, well, why didn't Joe Biden thank Donald Trump? Why didn't Joe Biden thank Operation Warp Speed? Why didn't Joe Biden thank Alex Azar? Can you imagine? I know it's laughable, but check this out.
Were you struck by the fact that the president did not make a single mention of Operation Warp Speed? Whether it's Redfield or Azar or Gerard or President Trump, none of that came yesterday. How come?
Well, I mean, I'm always one that wants to give credit where credit is warranted, and certainly Operation Warp Speed, President Trump put all of this into motion, and President Biden has followed through on it.
So the news isn't, look at the progress. What great news. Joe Biden and the CDC liberating people. The story is Biden said it, but he didn't thank Trump. And he didn't thank Robert Redfield or Alex Azar or Operation Warp Speed. And yet, if we're giving credit for putting things in motion, where are these very people about the January 6th riots that Donald Trump put in motion? They're very quiet there. It really takes gumption to find something bad about an announcement that they wanted all along, that for the first time in over a year, if you're vaccinated, if you followed the CDC guidelines, you don't have to wear masks. If Joe Biden built 1,000 miles of wall on the southern border, Fox News would be saying, can we afford this? These immigrants are escaping drug cartels after all. This is too expensive. If Joe Biden said, guns for everyone, no background checks, you got it, Republicans, just have at it, Newsmax would say, what if a kid hurt themselves? Why doesn't Joe Biden care about kids? They deserve none of our consideration as serious participants in any discussion because they aren't serious participants in any discussion. There is a stunning new report out of Politico that officials in Palm Beach, Florida, are actively contingency planning for a possible indictment of former President Donald Trump by Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance Jr., which could happen while Donald Trump is at his Florida club, Mar-a-Lago. That this is even something being gamed out by Palm Beach officials is stunning. The sources here are two high-ranking county officials from Palm Beach involved in these planning sessions. The real legal question is that of extradition from Florida to New York in the event of a New York indictment of Trump. Now, what's ironic or tragic, or I don't know what to call it, is that because of an obscure Florida statute about interstate extradition, it would basically come down to the Florida governor, who currently is the pro-Trump Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, who could ultimately decide to intervene and do an investigation of his own to determine whether the indicted person should be extradited to another state. Joe Abruzzo, clerk of the Circuit Court of Palm Beach County, says, quote, the statute leaves room for interpretation that the governor has the power to order a review and potentially not comply with the extradition notice. Now, on the other hand, Trump is currently moving from Mar-a-Lago in Florida to his Bedminster, New Jersey estate for the summer. If a New York City indictment came down with Trump in Jersey, it's a different ballgame. There's also a statute there allowing the governor to intervene, but the governor in New Jersey is Democrat Phil Murphy, not a Trump sycophant brown noser, would likely just not get involved at all. And if Trump were in New Jersey at the time of the indictment, Trump likely would be extradited to New York. So there's multiple layers here to consider. First of all, imagine a former president getting indicted, period. Would be one of the biggest news stories in American political history, period. Second, imagine if former President Trump is indicted and he's in Florida, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis refuses to extradite Trump. Consider what that would mean in terms of the legal insanity of a governor protecting a former president from extradition on an indictment, and that Trump would essentially become a fugitive in his own country, at least to his native New York, and likely wouldn't be able to travel to New York on the risk of arrest. Now, I think that while DeSantis would plausibly intervene, there are plenty of Republican officials who love the idea of Trump and an indictment as a way to finally get Trump out of the way and try to commandeer Trump's very constituents for themselves. These would be the Republicans who publicly still stand by Trump, but probably privately think he's an idiot and bad for the Republican Party. Could Ron DeSantis even try to intervene, but in exchange for something? Imagine DeSantis going to Trump and saying, I'll intervene to stop the extradition, but then you owe me. And what I want is for you not to run in 2024 and to endorse me for president in 2024. I don't know. But Trump being stuck in Florida without being able to leave is already pretty rich. Having to endorse the guy that saves him would be a just delightful possibility. Now, do I think any of this will happen? Very unlikely. I know we've all thought about that perp walk, that potential moment where Donald Trump is handcuffed and walked in front of the cameras, but that is so far from a real possibility. Even if Trump were indicted, he wouldn't be perp walked. It would all be very quiet. And quite frankly, I think it's all very far-fetched. But the fact that it's potentially real enough that officials around the country are thinking about, if Trump is indicted, how do we handle it? That's already historic. And it is absolutely stunning that it's the discussion. Monday, Memorial Day, we are doing a one-day membership special. Okay, this is what we call a single-day membership bomb. If you want to get in on a membership, including all of the great benefits, as well as the world's famous award-winning bonus show, Monday, Memorial Day is a beautiful day to do it. Just get on my newsletter. Go to davidpakman.com, upper right of the website. You type in your email address, you get on my newsletter. Monday, Memorial Day, you'll get an email telling you exactly how to take advantage of this special. Quick break, back after this. The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today. One of the things I've been saying during this pseudo scandal involving Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney is that we should not forget who Liz Cheney is. Liz Cheney is nothing more than a Republican with whom I disagree on basically every relevant policy question. And she happens to correctly believe that Joe Biden won the election, and it shouldn't be a controversial belief. That is it. And it's been disappointing to see even some on the supposed left talk about we should stand with Liz Cheney. Stand with her for what? If Republicans want to strip her of her leadership role as they did, let them figure it out. I don't care to defend Liz Cheney one way or the other. Sure, it's funny. It's curious to see the incredible double standard where the right claims to oppose so-called cancellation, and yet they canceled Liz Cheney's leadership position for something that should be uncontroversial, which is Trump really lost the election. That's it. But I have no interest in defending Liz Cheney or standing with Liz Cheney. And case in point, she was interviewed by Fox News' Bret Baier late last week. And on one issue, the 2020 election results, she did a really great thing. She told Fox News host Bret Baier, your network has to tell the truth about this issue. Bret Baier didn't like it. Lots of people did. That a Republican went on Fox News and said, you need to tell the truth about the election. Let's take a look.
In the past. I continue to say it, though, Brett.
And
Brett, I continue to say
it because in principle. I get
but
it.
It's because
but for the people of Wyoming
Brett,
who are
right.
electing a congressperson to fight for them and to fight against the Biden agenda, why wouldn't they say, is this the person that's going to get it done? That's what your colleagues are asking.
I'm going to answer the question. We all have an obligation, and I would say Fox News especially Fox News, has a particular obligation to make sure people know the election wasn't stolen.
Fox
News, Brett, I'm going to answer your question. Fox News needs to make sure that the American people,
Fox News, you have to know that this show has said that
the
numerous
American
times.
people, Brett, you're doing the interview. I'm answering the questions.
Congresswoman.
We need to make sure that the American people recognize and understand that the election wasn't stolen, that we shouldn't perpetuate the big lie, and that there's real danger. You know, I've worked in countries around the world.
Okay, so it's great, right? I mean, I agree. That's great. Seeing a Republican do that on Fox News, that's great stuff. But then, and this is the bigger point, Bret Baier asks Liz Cheney, did you vote for Joe Biden? She's so anti-Trump. Did you vote for Joe Biden? And she says not only did she not vote for Joe Biden against Trump, she would never vote for any Democrat, period. Doesn't matter who it is. Take a look.
And we are going to abide by the rule of law.
Do you believe that America is better off with President Biden than President Trump?
I believe that President Trump's policies, which I supported 93% of the time, were much better for America. Now, that isn't the issue, though. The issue is whether or not we abide by the rule of law.
Did you vote for Joe Biden?
I did not. And I would not vote for a Democrat ever.
Do not forget who Liz Cheney is. Her depraved, immoral party, of which she's a proud member, did her wrong. Okay, they can figure it out. We're not standing with her or them. She may be anti the former guy, anti-Trump, but she's still a right-winger and a radical one as that. As left as I am, I would never make a proactive, preemptive blanket statement like I would never vote for a Republican. If you give me a specific race and the Republican is better than the Democratic option, then I'd vote for the Republican. It's that simple. The fact that she's making such a statement with no caveats about the quality of the Republican and the quality of the Democrat really shows us what we should have already known, which is Liz Cheney is no different than the Trump-McCarthy wing of the party with some slightly different beliefs. But remember, she voted with Trump, what was it, 92% of the time? Something like that. She's burning a bridge that's already on fire, and we shouldn't see it as a particularly brave move or anything like it. I don't take sides in the Trumpian civil war. It's bad for them. Let the war rage. I have no interest in defending anybody on either side of it. Mitt Romney, anti-Trump Republican, didn't vote for Trump, marched with Black Lives Matter. Okay. He was asked, okay, Mr. Romney, sir, now that Biden's president, what next? And he said his priority is preventing tax increases and preventing socialism. These are not our friends, and it's important not to be tricked into thinking they are. Liz Cheney has been silent on the voter suppression bills that have been spreading nationally. She's doing nothing to speak out against it. She just doesn't believe that Trump won. She doesn't believe that lie. It's not heroic. And this is why Liz Cheney shouldn't be lionized just for being one Republican willing to tell one simple truth. At the end of the day, she doesn't really want anything to change. And you heard it from her. She would never vote for any Democrat, period. So we've covered one side of the Liz Cheney fiasco, which is Republicans have stripped Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney from her leadership role because she admits Joe Biden won the election. And Trump is lying when he says that he won and he should stop. That's the one side. Now, on the other side of that is that Liz Cheney was replaced by someone, and that someone is Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who now becomes Republican conference chair after Liz Cheney's removal. The pro-Trump right wing is going absolutely crazy about Elise Stefanik. They just love her. And sadly, Elise Stefanik is sort of a better spoken Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. She's just as nutty. Don't be confused. She just knows how to better present her ideas to appear less outrageous. And case in point, she gets herself a congratulatory pat on the back interview on Fox News this weekend, conducted by none other than Trump suck-up Maria Bartiromo. And right away, it goes to the big lie about the election being stolen. And again, Stefanik doesn't indicate that her opinion is any different than Marjorie Taylor Greene's on this issue. She just knows how to better frame her answer to be about her constituents and election integrity, but she has no problem accepting Maria Bartiromo's framing of the question. So check it out and understand that Maria's question is, do you think there will be a fair election in 2022, which would allow you to investigate the 2020 election, which was, of course, stolen? It's a ridiculous question. And here's how Elise Stefanik answers it.
Are you expecting a free and fair election to enable you to do that next year?
Well, that's one of the really important issues, Maria. When I go home to my district and as I talk to my colleagues, this is the case across the country, voters want to make sure that they have faith in our election system, which is why election integrity and election security is a top priority for the American people. And it should matter to you whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. This is why you're seeing state legislatures like Florida, like Arizona, taking action to address and strengthen their election systems.
This is why she's so slippery. That's right. Americans care about secure election systems, and we have them. The 2020 election was not close. It was one of the most secure that we've had. And as always, with some anecdotal instances of irregularities, not nearly a fraction of what you'd need to change the results in any one state. It doesn't matter, though, because that's not what Elise Stefanik will tell you. She'll tell you, since it matters to my constituents, it was also irregular. We need major action. What they mean by this is we didn't suppress enough of the vote in 2020. If you look at her comments outside of this interview since the election, you get a sense for her point of view. She's promoted conspiracy theories about a stolen election. Hours after the invasion of the Capitol on January 6th, she voted against accepting Pennsylvania's electoral votes. On January 12th, Harvard University announced they are removing Stefanik from its Institute of Politics because of her role in promoting these false claims. But she's better at talking about it to sound marginally less off the wall than some of her colleagues, and that makes her dangerous. Here's a little bit more, and then it sort of comes mask off.
We need voter identification. We need chain of custody when it comes to the absentee mail-in ballots, signature verifications. And what the Democrats have put forward is a federal takeover to put them into power forever. The For the Politicians Act, H.R. 1, which would be taxpayer-funded campaigns.
Completely off the rails. Sensible reforms are radical far left. It's absolutely a crazy authoritarian clampdown on voting, which they want. Republicans are talking about election integrity, but that's not really what they want here. She's horrifying. And then just for a little more flavor, the interview ends with Elise Stefanik talking about how great Donald Trump is. It's almost like a rite of passage on Maria Bartiromo's show.
Yeah, real quick, Congressman, before you go, President Trump supported you to get the third highest rank in the GOP. How important is he to the party right now?
He's critical to the party. He is the leader of the Republican Party. Voters determine the leader of the Republican Party, and they continue to look to President Trump for his vision. And he's going to be an important part of us winning back the House in 2022.
All right, we will leave it there. Congrats again, Congresswoman. We hope you'll come back. We will be watching the developments. Thank you so much.
So there it is, pledging full and total loyalty to Donald Trump. It's all his for the taking. And as far as Elise Stefanik is concerned, Trump gets to pick Republican winners in 2022, and Trump gets to run in 2024 if he so wants, and she will support him blindly and to the ends of the earth. This is the Republican Party right now. Cheney out. That's what Liz Cheney was replaced by. And if this tells us anything about the next couple of years, it's that it doesn't seem the Republican Party is going to be freeing itself from the grip of Trump. Send me your thoughts if you disagree. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. Find me on Instagram at david.pakman. The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. An outrageous and shocking video of now Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene showing up at the House of Representatives in February of 2019, going to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office and shouting outrageous things through the mail slot in the door has been found and published. The video has since been deleted, and it really starts to tell a bigger story about the obsessive, almost stalker-like harassment of AOC by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And the reason that this is again in the news is that Marjorie Taylor Greene confronted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez again outside the House chamber last week. And it has people talking about, is this criminal? Is this rising to the point of being stalking in some sense? And all sorts of other questions. We now have to add to this a new video which shows a longer pattern of this ridiculous behavior. Check out the first part of the video.
You want to talk to Crazy Ocasio? You come to this little thing and you open it up and you whisper into her. Session. This is confession. This is Ocasio confession right there.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm an American citizen. I pay your salary through the taxes that you collect from me through the IRS because I'm a tax-paying citizen of the United States. I'm a woman. I'm a female business owner.
So that you really understand the optics, if you're just listening on the radio or to the audio podcast. In the video, Marjorie Taylor Greene is bent over at the waist, speaking through the mail slot on AOC's door. I'm a woman and I'm a female. This woman is really disgusting. I mean, just a vile, vile person Let's keep watching.
And I'm proud to be an American woman. And I do not support your socialist policies, and I do not support your murderous abortion policies. As a mother of 3 children, I'm appalled at New York's law for abortion, and it needs to end, and it needs to stop now. You're bringing God's judgment on our country, and I'm against it, as well as my friends.
Now, I have to break in for a moment. Not that any of this makes sense, but how is New York state abortion policy related to AOC? AOC lived in New York and worked in jobs that had nothing to do with policy. And then she was elected a member of Congress representing New York and Washington, D.C. federally. The federal government doesn't decide state law on abortion in New York. You would think Marjorie Taylor Greene might know that since she's about states' rights. Let's continue.
So you need to stop being a baby and stop locking your door and come out and face the American citizens that you serve. If you want to be a big girl, you need to get rid of your diaper and come out and be able to talk to the American citizens.
Putting aside that Marjorie Taylor Greene is a congresswoman, this kind of behavior, take off your diaper, this kind of behavior is humiliating and embarrassing for any adult to be seen doing. But it's not just a random person. It happens to be someone who's now a member of Congress herself, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, there's another aspect to this. Friday, AOC told reporters that Greene is, quote, deeply unwell and clearly needs help. And her kind of fixation has lasted for several years now. This is something that remains difficult because on the one hand, you see that video of Marjorie Taylor Greene and you see her speeches and her behavior and the way she speaks and looks at people. It's sort of obvious that she's unwell. There does seem to be a mental illness component here. But in addition to that, she's a radical Republican who doesn't deserve to be in Congress because of her beliefs. Mental health is a major issue, which we don't stigmatize on this program. And Marjorie Taylor Greene does seem to need help. If a doctor determines so, medication as well. But we can't pretend this is only mental illness. And that's why every time we bring this up, and I'm sort of glad AOC did because it allows us the opportunity to talk about it. When we talk about, oh, this person is saying crazy things politically, they're mentally ill. It's not that simple. Marjorie Taylor Greene is different than Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney has views that I disagree with, but I've never seen an indication that Mitt Romney seems to be unwell in the way that Marjorie Taylor Greene is unwell. But that doesn't excuse the disgusting political beliefs either. We can't pretend it's only mental illness. It's also a radicalized, indoctrinated individual who's harassing a member of Congress regularly. If an employee at most companies did this to another employee, they would be fired, period. That's it. And the Republican Party is so sick, the voters, that is, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is fundraising off of these confrontations. So absolutely off the rails and unclear if there will be any consequences to that. We also learned that Marjorie Taylor Greene is involved in a tax fraud. Let's talk about that next. I love this story because it combines radical right-wing arrogance with real estate and tax law, which are all things that I enjoy. We have now learned that ridiculous radical right robot, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, filed homestead exemptions or homestead declarations, as they are sometimes called, on 2 homes, which is against the law. This is, as we like to say, a fraud. She made a fraud. Let's first talk about homestead exemptions. A homestead exemption is a legal declaration that lets you say, this home I own, this is my primary residence. It is where I am sheltered. And in exchange for such a declaration, the value of your home is protected from property tax claims, from creditors, from forced sales, and a number of other circumstances. In normal cases, the way debt works in the U.S. is that you can have situations where you could be forced to sell an asset to pay off a creditor or a debt that you owe. A homestead exemption or declaration lets you say, this property is my home. This is my residence. This is where I live. It's not a second home. It's not an investment property. And so by declaring it a homestead, you can't be forced to sell that home to pay your debts. They can't leave you homeless to pay your debts. This is separate from foreclosure, but it's a very particular type of declaration. In some states, only some portion of the home's value is protected, and that amount can vary. Texas has no dollar value limit. Some states do. And additionally, many states give you a tax break because you do not have to pay property taxes on some portion of your home's value. So if a certain state exempts $100,000 of value with a homestead declaration, if the house is worth $500K, but $100K is exempt, you pay property taxes as if the house were worth only $400,000. Okay, but here's the rule. You can only do it on one property. Channel 2 Action News in Atlanta did an investigation and found that Marjorie Taylor Greene and her husband have 2 active homestead exemptions, which is against the law in Georgia. The Greenes are getting a tax break on 2 homes in 2 different counties. Channel 2 News pulled the Greenes homestead exemption application in Fulton County and in Floyd County. In the Floyd County application, Marjorie Taylor Greene's husband left blank the line which says, "Do you have an exemption on another property?" That is a lie by omission. I recall talking to my real estate attorney about this a couple of years back. And I asked, when we were talking about different transactions I've been involved in and the homestead declaration, I asked, how often do people get caught for this? He said, I know of many people that do this and they do get away with it. Marjorie Taylor Greene appears to have gotten caught. Fulton County tax officials confirm that Greene never stopped getting the tax break on the Fulton property, but declared it on the Floyd County property. Now, there are, at least in theory, consequences for doing this. This is defrauding the state, to be clear. The penalty for filing a false homestead exemption, according to Georgia code, is twice your tax bill. For the Greenes, that would be about $12,000. There were 2 statements put out by Greene's office. The first statement was, "This is merely a pathetic smear." That was statement number 1. This escalated. And then the second statement was calling this fake news and saying this was just an error by Fulton County. The Greenes are claiming they requested the homestead exemption be canceled for the Fulton County, but maybe because of COVID, I don't know, they never did it. But now they've got it all fixed up. So she's going with that. She's going with, we did everything right, but something COVID, and it prevented it from happening. That doesn't explain why they didn't answer the question, do you have an active homestead exemption on another property right now? The answer was yes. They left that blank. It seems like a clear line by omission. Maybe it was lost in the mail, which was destroyed by Donald Trump's crony, Louis DeJoy. But the simplest explanation is that this is fraud. Marjorie Taylor Greene is making up that she tried canceling it and that they intentionally lied and they got caught, plain and simple. Now, the question of whether there will be consequences, you all know how that works when it comes to people in positions of power in the United States. So I don't know, but I'm certainly not confident that there will be any consequences, but an apparent fraud committed by Marjorie Taylor Greene and her husband. The party of rules and law and order and all of this stuff. Don't forget that. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a caller who says woke and cancellations are merely constructs that don't exist. What? Let's take a listen.
Yes, sir. I'm calling simply because the terms woke and cancel don't exist. They are constructs that have been created by social media. It would be useful if you stopped promoting them.
Well, first of all, I don't really promote them. We do talk about them on the show. In a sense, isn't everything a construct? I mean, I guess a rock isn't a construct. It's a physical rock. But aren't most political discussions made up of constructs and things that as societies we've agreed? I don't know. I'm having trouble following it. Let's listen to a little more.
These are words that people think they know what they're talking about. Rest assured, they do not. Woke? Well, what does that mean? That you have suddenly become aware of the fact that there is injustice in America? Cancel? Well, we have other terms and phrases for disavowing those who fail to meet our criteria. But, imagining that this is in some way associated with a culture is just bizarre. So I'm hoping we can get you to stop using these words as they have been presented.
So I often get voicemails asking me not to do something that I've not done or responding to things I haven't covered. I don't use the term woke in an unironic way. The only times I've used the term woke are to point fun at its absurd usage by others. So, I mean, listen, in a sense, all of these concepts are constructs. We always have synonyms we can use, but I don't really know what exactly the point is of the call, particularly since when I talk about the left when I talk about the right has canceled someone while claiming to be against cancellations, I am sort of using the term tongue in cheek. When I talk about wokeism, it's often a reaction to the right's kind of weird use of it. But I don't use the term woke in a real way. So maybe the caller and I are on the same page, but at the same time, maybe we're not. I don't really know. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. Joe Biden has canceled, speaking of which, Donald Trump's planned National Garden of American Heroes, and it's triggering people. And we're going to talk about the origins of it and much more. This is a funny story a bunch of people sent me. Harry Styles, who's a British musician, got an award recently, and he seemed to no longer have a British accent. And I have a bunch of funny related stories about this. And I think it'll be an entertaining story at minimum. And then we do still have, at least in theory, the rescheduled Olympics coming later this year to Japan. 80% of the Japanese oppose the Olympics being done in Japan this summer. We're going to talk about why, what's going on, the preparations that are being made. Could it be done safely, et cetera, and much more, including some of the upcoming plans for the show over the next few weeks. Don't miss today's bonus show. That's just a suggestion. It's not an authoritarian demand. It's just, I think you would enjoy the bonus show. You can get instant access to it by signing up at joinpakman.com. That also comes with many other great benefits, including the commercial-free version of the daily audio and video show, the members-only newsletter, invitations to occasional members-only town halls and other events, and the pleasure of knowing you're supporting alternatives to homogenous corporate media. Sign up at joinpakman.com, and I will see you in mere moments on today's bonus show. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.